No. Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week for this special year-end awards discussion SBC, Danny Segura. He's back. He just returned from a hike up the Andes. My man reached 17.5 and change as he climbed Nevada de Huila in Colombia. Hope I got that right, Danny.
You did.
Joins us as well. Did you guys ever check out his piece on Brennan Ward's return to MMA after years of addiction? Check it out. My man had a big year. Goes from MMA Junkie Radio in 2022. He reached milestones of 3,300 podcast episodes and 15 years of co-hosting the show. The uber talented Cold Coffee's on the ones and twos. Let's get to it. All right. So, gentlemen, this past year we were treated to some big moments in MMA, and the ladies had a lot to do with that. Our first topic is about MMA Junkie's choice for Female Fighter of the Year in 2022, Zhang Weili. It's already been released. The UFC strawweight champion went 2-0, culminating with her recapturing the title in November at UFC 281, where she submitted Carla Esparza. What did you think of Weili's accomplishments in 2022? Was she your choice for the award, or did you submit a vote for another athlete? That's right. We're a democracy here at MMA Junkie. We voted, so sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't. Danny, you're leading off.
Yeah, she was my female fighter of the year. She, in my opinion, undoubtedly had, at least in the UFC, the best year as far as the ladies are concerned. She got a phenomenal win over Joanna Jędrzejczyk with a beautiful spinning back fist that needs to be talked about as one of the best finishes of 2022, and send her to retirement in a fight that a lot of people thought it was going to be somewhat or a lot more competitive, given their first fight, which was one of the greatest female fights in the history of the sport. And then she goes and fights Carla Esparza, who was on a great run, looked solid, and captured the belt. And basically, Zhang Weili beat her in her own game. She decided to oblige and grapple with Carla Esparza, out-wrestled her in many situations, and ended up submitting her, a fighter that is known for her grappling. Also, I want to mention that Larissa Pacheco, and that's why I said Zhang Weili had the best year of the ladies in the UFC. Larissa Pacheco over at PFL had a fantastic run as well. 4-0, dethroning Kayla Harrison, who had won the previous championships, the previous seasons. I mean, just a spectacular run. But in my opinion, what Zhang Weili, as far as quality of opponent, what she did, it just has a lot more weight than what Larissa Pacheco did. So in my mind, and my vote went to Zhang Weili. She's the female fighter of the year.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up a little bit, Danny, because right away in the chat room, and you can participate via the chat, Prince Vegata-san says 2 fights, though? So maybe he was already intimating that perhaps Pacheco's 4-0 run was more impressive. Nolan, what'd you think?
Yeah, no, I think, Zhang Weili is the correct choice here. There's obviously, when it comes down to these awards, you're going to see throughout the show that there's sometimes you have to figure out a conversion rate in your head, right? Like, how much does 3 non-title fights in PFL weigh against fighting Joanna in a 3-round fight? Like, there's all these things that go into it that maybe to one person is thinks one way and one person thinks another. That's the fun of these awards. But I think with this one, I feel pretty confident saying that Zhang Weili is the right choice here. I think if you look at the caliber of competition that she fought, I mean, Larissa Pacheco beat Kayla Harrison. That is a great feat. I think, obviously Kayla, nobody out of the dozen plus people that Kayla fought could do that. But I just think fighting Joanna, fighting Carla Esparza and dominating the way that she did, just looking like a beast, coming back from, kind of a bumpy few fights for Zhang Weili to come back and get her belt back. I just think that I got to give it to her. I think that that's a pretty comfortable choice, where some of these other categories, I think, are a little bit closer.
All right. And like I said, it's in the books. We already released it on MMA Junkie, but it's
Yeah.
still fun to at least express our thoughts. So there's nothing really Goes can say or me that will change anything, but still Goes. Was there anything last minute that you had for any other fighter, or were you on team Zhang Weili as well?
This one probably made the most sense out of all of them, just because of how destructive she was. You know, it's 2 wins. Yeah, I know that was a gripe in the chat, and I understand that sometimes it's going to happen, but it's 2 wins over 2 former champions, and she left no doubts. Right, she got finishes, and she was just destructive in both of those. Left zero doubt in our minds. And the scary thing is, this girl's still improving. You know, it's the magnitude of what you do as a fighter as a whole. She carries that flag, right, and represents so much in the sport. Yeah, you can say Larissa Pacheco. You could throw her name out there, and people aren't going to think you're crazy. You know, Kayla Harrison's name is getting thrown out there as one of the best female fighters right now, currently. So to get a win over her and to kind of stop what she had going on, that's pretty massive. But then if you go back to what else she did, it's just they're wins. You know, there's nothing really to that. There's not that much value to it. 2 former champions that a lot of people, had they faced them, probably would not have done well. I think that's enough to make Zhang Weili the fighter of the year.
So, guys, allow me to push back just a little bit here. What about just 2 versus 4? I know UFC has the top athletes most consistently, not all of them. We all agree that Bellator, PFL, One Championship, Invicta, they have a few shining stars as well. But top to bottom, consistently, it is UFC. And no disrespect to these opponents, but Carla was a big underdog coming into this fight, right? So the odds makers are considered pretty sharp. Joanna, could she have already been thinking retirement on the way? She hadn't even fought in 2 years. And if you look back, I think she was like 3-4 since she lost her title. So does that really eclipse weighing in 4 times, winning 4 times? I believe 3 of them were finishes, and toppling the great Kayla Harrison, who arguably didn't even lose rounds, much less fights. Anybody who wants some?
Well, I'll say this. I think part of it for Larissa, and this might be an unfair criticism, is I feel like her division, too, is working against her, right? Like the women's lightweight division. I mean, some of the girls she fought had good records. I believe she beat somebody who was 7-1, somebody else maybe that was 7-2 and a 5-2, something like that. Those were the finishes. So, I mean, those are obviously pretty decent records. But I think with that division, you don't really know what you're going to get, right? Like the talent pool isn't that deep. So for me, I kind of look at it and I say, okay, well, with that could possibly, and this is not to mean the whole thing, but what she did this year, but I mean that could possibly, if you were to transfer those to different divisions, I mean those are the sort of records that we would see in LFA or something like that. Like PFL is doing a very good job of finding people in that division, and I think some of these girls are pretty talented. But I think if you try to compare that to, hey, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Carla Esparza, like that's where it kind of gets me. You know, where I kind of think sure, she had those 3 wins, but like, is that more impactful than beating Joanna, you know, in a very violent fashion? I don't think so personally.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about 2 historic talents, Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Carla Esparza. They're two of the best 5 fighters that have ever existed at 115 pounds in the sport, and she beat them both in 1 calendar year. I mean, I think that's pretty damn impressive. And yeah, I know Joanna Jędrzejczyk's record towards the end might have been a little bit not great, but keep in mind, every fight is like a title fight. Every fight she's fighting, you know, some of the best in the world. She never took a step back. She never did a climb back up the ladder. She was just constantly stayed at the top. So yeah, in my opinion, I think it was there was an argument there for Larissa, but for me, it was a clear choice that Zhang Weili was the correct one.
I'm going to go out in the woods here, and then all that goes finish up. I know he wants to chime in, but what about just, you know, like the whole season, the way it's compacted? You know, we even talk about like it's the 2022 season, like there's a game or a fight in January and then one in December. They do it all like in 6 months. So like turning it around like that, you know, differing game plans against different types of skill sets that are coming at you. Again, the weight cuts. And I don't know, not to sound cruel and all, because I think I put it, you know, in our discussion earlier, Zhang Weili's a unit, man. Trust me, she's like, I think the world of her, but we're nitpicking here, right? I feel like she was gifted the title, the opportunities to fight, you know, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, going even back to last year. She had gotten finished by Rose Namajunas, then just got the fighter again in what's considered a deep strawweight division. Then gets Joanna again after 2 years. I get it, Danny. Joanna's a stud too, but off 2 years, it just didn't feel like the same. And then Carla off, one of the worst title winning performances ever. So still, like, I don't know, man. I feel like Larissa did it the hard way, and she just took on the best and overcame it. But yeah, again, how about you guys? Maybe I'm drowning here.
But she slipped by Kayla Harrison, right? Like, we all watched that fight, and when they were reading the scorecards, we didn't really know what was going to happen, right? Where Zhang Weili just completely destroyed her opponents. Plus, you guys are leaving one out. Don't forget, she 10-9 Francis Ngannou at the PI, right? She's already up on him, so that's a third fight that she won. What more do you want from this girl, George? Who else does she have to pick up?
Hey, with that, I got to exit. I just got owned. All right. So let's move on to topic number 2. I tried, Larissa. I tried. The category of male fighter of the year was also not unanimous, as my colleagues and I tore it up in our communication channels discussing the different candidates. Alex Pereira was our winner. Congrats, Watan. Were you all on board with this one? And did your vote go elsewhere is what we want to know here. And we're going to start with you, Nolan, this time.
Yeah, I think this one's a little bit closer. I came into this debate or this discussion when this was first proposed, and I said, yeah, it should be Alex Pereira. Now, I know there was some pushback. Alexander Volkanovski's name, I think that's really what the debate is going to be here. I see both sides of it. I think that I do lean with Pereira just because, again, I kind of look at the year that he had, and I say he kind of had a more impactful year overall. I mean, Alexander Volkanovski, he beat the Korean Zombie, came back, beat Max Holloway, which is, I think, probably the best performance either fighter had. But I just kind of, when I look at the Zombie fight, I feel like Zombie perhaps isn't what he once was. I just feel like Alexander Volkanovski, sure, he's the greatest pound for pound fighter in the world right now. But Alex Pereira to come in and do what he did and kind of have this year where he went from a guy that essentially had no MMA experience, and came through and went 3-0, won the title against his rival, Madison Square Garden, a rally TKO. I just felt like, again, we weigh all these things and how, which weighs more than what, but there was just something about this year that he had that I felt was really special and went kind of beyond just the wins and losses. It was just such a rare sort of run, quick run up the top. Sure, the UFC has a say in that. They can put people in whatever position they want without necessarily the same necessary merit build. But at the same time, he goes out there, he beats Israel Adesanya in a great fight, and is now the middleweight champ of the world. I did lean with him. I understand the arguments for Volkanovski as well. So I'm not as comfortable or confident, having to pick one person, but that's the name of the game. And I did lean with Pereira.
All right, Goes, you're coming up next. I want to see what side you're leaning on. Let's try this. Aussie?
Oi, oi, oi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this one was a tougher one, guys. We really had to go back and forth on this one. But both guys did what you asked from them, right, in the year. It was pretty good. Volkanovski defending his belt along the way, I think that carries a little bit. You really have to nitpick when it comes down to greatness, guys. That's why we have to pick every little thing we can here. If you look at the strength of schedule, okay, Volkanovski with Korean Zombie, yeah, he did kind of fall off a little bit, but here's the thing. When you look at pictures of the Korean Zombie at the end of that fight, right? Like, he looked like he was in a car crash. Max Holloway looked like he didn't know what hit him. Volkanovski really, really took it to these two guys. Now, you're looking at 2 victories versus 3, and as the year progresses, like, if you really, really want to nitpick, does the Cannonier win over Strickland? Does that kind of like take a little bit off of Strickland's case, for Pereira? I don't know. An extra victory is an extra victory. That's a big deal. So there's so much that you have to kind of go back and forth. He did dethrone a guy who's been champ for a while. Has been pretty destructive and doing bad things to other people. So you got to give him credit there. But at the same time, you have to think, well, he was kind of losing that fight up until the very end. So my decision came down to this. Volkanovski was reminding people throughout the year that he's one of the baddest men on the planet. Alex Pereira did something phenomenal, but there's still question marks, right? So that was just the little edge that I gave Volkanovski, but there really is no wrong answer. It's so close.
Yeah, and Goes, not only was he losing that fight versus Izzy, in round 1, he basically almost got finished. Man, this one was a tough one too. Let's hear what Danny's got to say.
Yeah, this one was a very complicated one because you have to weigh in a lot of factors, right? But in my opinion, and by the way, before I say this, I just want to say that I'm okay with Alex Pereira being the fighter of the year. I mean, how can you say he didn't have a phenomenal year? He obviously did. But in my mind, Alexander Volkanovski was the 2022 fighter of the year. I mean, what that guy did in that year is far more bigger, far more important than what Alex Pereira did. Alex Pereira became a champion, which is not easy to do, extremely, extremely difficult and extremely special to do. But let's not forget, he did get somewhat of easy matchups. Bruno Silva, since fighting Pereira, he went 0-2 in 2022. Sean Strickland went 1-2 in 2022. And he was losing the fight against Adesanya, as Goes mentioned. So, again, a phenomenal year. But, the UFC kind of did walk him, hold his hand and walk them a little bit to a title shot. Let's not forget that. And there's questions about how he will fare in the future against guys that can wrestle, guys that are elite wrestlers in that division. Whereas Alexander Volkanovski, he had 2 title fights. Yes, one less fight than Poatan, but still both championship fights. So we're talking about 50 minutes of fighting compared to 55 minutes of fighting with Pereira. And in that year, he came in as a good champion, but a bit of a doubted champion. He was coming off a fight where he almost got finished by Brian Ortega in a couple fights with close submissions. Granted, yeah, he did put a beating on Ortega, but still. Then you also had Max Holloway that same year in 2021, putting a crazy beating on Kelvin Kadar, giving us a fight of the year contender with Jair Rodriguez. Let's say how it is. Alexander Volkanovski going into 2022 was a doubted champion. A lot of people thought that still the best fighter, even though the record was 0-2 against Max Holloway. A lot of people thought that the best fighter out there at 145 pounds was Max Holloway. And in that process, in that 2022 year, he put a historical, terrible beating on the Korean Zombie. And then he went on to do the same to Max Holloway in a fight that, I mean, it looked like he was, levels below him. And in that span of a year, not only did he defend the belt twice, but he did enough to convince many people to be, the pound for pound, to be number 1 in the pound for pound rankings today. I mean, you go look at that list, he's right there. So in a year where you defend the belt twice, in a year where you become the, today's GOAT, pound for pound best, I mean, that's pretty great to me. So no pun intended. So in my opinion, Alexander Volkanovski, that was the vote. But again, Poatan, phenomenal year. So, I mean, I can't be mad about that either.
Well, let's send it back to Nolan because it seems I'm also on Team Volkanovski, but I think you guys did a good job. There's nothing really else I can add to it other than Pereira became champ, Volkanovski became a superstar, But Nolan, I mean, was this a tough one for you? Did you, go back and forth, or do you feel like we're missing something here?
No, I mean, it was difficult. I think we all kind of are on the same page here, right? When we make these arguments and we're looking at a sliver of the big picture and we're saying, oh, I think the argument should be made this way versus this way. It almost sounds insulting to the other fighter, which I kind of hate, because you're looking at either one of these guys are 2 of the greatest fighters on the planet right now. And to kind of, say that, well, Volkanovski fought a zombie that didn't look great, or, Alex Pereira was kind of losing that fight against Israel. It's not, it comes across as like a backhanded thing. And so I hate doing that. But yeah, I mean, I came into this debate feeling, when we first proposed it, feeling pretty confident in Alex. And then with some of the arguments that were made, I was like, shoot, like, this is more of like a tie than I thought. So I did go with my gut. I did feel like the kind of maybe that breakthrough factor that he had this year, which is, it's a different award, but I felt like it was just kind of his year. Like, this was the year of the Alex Pereira. Like, we knew Alexander Volkanovski was good, and he did what we thought he would do to Korean Zombie, and he did what I thought he would do to Max Holloway. I know not everybody was on the same page there. I just feel like Alex kind of had that it factor. He had that run and just kind of topped it off in a great way at the end of the year. So that's why I kind of lean with him. I understand all the arguments. I don't think sometimes it's comparing apples and oranges, to be honest, not to try to kill the fun of this debate, and say that nobody's wrong and nobody's right. But that's right. Kind of the way that it honestly is.
And you're right, man. It does feel terrible when we feel like we have to diminish other people or their accomplishments. Just thinking back on what I said about Esparza and Joanna, two fighters that are probably destined for the Hall of Fame. Sorry, ladies, is all I can say. But hey, this is what it's all about, man, is knocking each other around here on SBC. In fact, the chat room's got a few things to say. Mark Fellows says, Goes knows what's up. And he puts up the Australian flag. Junk says, I say Pereira because in 3 UFC fights, he's champ. Hey, that's an impressive run. And Pereira has won some of the awards that we've seen out there. So we're definitely not saying he sucks. Joker Boom says, Big Head Volkanovski, the bum, is going down. All right. Let me see here. Junk says, honestly, Volk deserves it more, but Poitin win was so shocking, and Izzy was on a long win streak. It was a tough one. It was a tough one for sure. Good stuff there. Keep it calm in chat. All right, we're going to go to topic number 3, knockout of the year. Whoo, this one's never easy, guys. It's never even a problem to come up with the nominations, and we can usually go into the double digits. But in the end, some of them just stand out over the others. They're just special because they'll never be forgotten. That's usually some of the strongest criteria. Won't be forgotten, right, guys? As of this broadcast, we've yet to reveal the award, nor the other 2 that are going to follow. So this might give you an idea of what the current war room is like in our discussions as a panel on Junkie here. Who are you guys pushing for on this one in 2022, the KO of the year, and why? Goes, the floor is yours.
I think it's a 2-horse race here, guys. I think it's between Michael Chandler, what he did to Tony Ferguson, and Leon Edwards, what he did to Kamaru Usman. I'm going with Michael Chandler. Look, going into the fight, the guy had KO power. You knew what he could do, but I don't think anybody knew that this would be in his tool belt, right? To land this type of kick, you have to be in the right angle at the right time. Even throwing it can be very dangerous. He's the smaller fighter. You just weren't expecting it. It was that type of knockout where this has only happened a couple times. And if you guys have been to a live event, it's where it's quiet first and then loud. And it's quiet because all of the air is sucked out of the arena because everybody starts off by going, and then they start cheering. I think it was that type of a knockout. The one with Leon Edwards, it's great. It was a great knockout. It was a great moment. It represented something pretty amazing. But the thing is, we see that type of knockout kind of regularly. So it's like when you're watching SportsCenter and they're doing the best plays of the night or whatever. A lot of times you'll see somebody in baseball making an amazing catch. I'm not trying to take anything away from what they did, but the problem with that is you see it a lot, right? That's why, like, if you see a bicycle kick in soccer, it usually beats them for the play of the night, right? Something like that. To me, Leon Edwards' head kick, the moment, it was great, but it was kind of like that big catch in baseball where you just kind of see a lot of that happening. So, and then maybe even at the end of the day, you put yourself in their position and go, well, which would I rather take? And I feel like Tony Ferguson kind of after that has to figure out, do I even want to keep fighting? And Kamaru Usman, I think, is just more of a case of I just shake it off and come back. The magnitude of what Michael Chandler did was pretty amazing, man. It felt like his head was just going to pop right off. So I give it to Michael Chandler.
So you're saying the isolation itself of the technique is kind of weighed heavily with you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up is Danny.
I agree, but disagree at the same time with Goes. I agree in the sense that aesthetically wise.
I'm going to tell you guys why he's a jackass too. I love these. No, I said I love it when it starts that way because really what we're saying is, my man over here Goes is a genius, but I'm going to tell you why he's also a jackass. This way.
Yeah, no. Look, Goes broke it down perfectly. Aesthetically speaking, that Michael Chandler KO was just beautiful, right? It was amazing. But when I personally try to pick whether it's submission, knockout, or whatever it is, I weigh in other factors beyond just the mechanics of the KO. And this is where it gets difficult, right? Because we have different criteria. We have different factors that we weigh in. And in my opinion, also the significance of the knockout is very important. Because there are a lot of great knockouts in the regional circuit, man. There are maybe even some that are more beautiful than the Michael Chandler one. It's just maybe they're not as popular or we don't get to see them as much. They don't go as viral. But you got to weigh in who he knocked out here. I mean, Tony Ferguson, a legend, a lightweight legend, one of the best fighters to not win an undisputed title. But at that time, he, and he still is on a bit of a downfall, and probably his better days are over. Leon Edwards knocked out Kamaru Usman, the guy who had never lost in the UFC. He was on like a 19-fight win streak, was the number one pound-for-pound guy on the planet before that knockout. He had lost to him prior as well. I mean, he was losing the fight quite badly. I mean, there was so much going into that fight, and then to knock out the pound-for-pound guy, to give him his first L in a very devastating way. It's not like he gave him his first L in like a split decision. I mean, nobody saw this coming. And on top of that, the knockout was nice, man. It was a nice knockout. Maybe not as nice as Chandler, but it was a nice looking KO. I mean, the way that Kamaru Usman just falls, and then, I mean, you've seen the memes, right? Like, it was bad, man. So in my opinion, if you're going to do say like a video on YouTube of like the best knockouts of 2022, probably your thumbnail is going to be that. Like, if we're going to define a knockout that just completely defines 2022, if we're going to put a knockout, in my opinion, that is Leon Edwards putting the lights out on Kamaru Usman. Again, a very, very difficult choice here. I love the Chandler KO. I mean, you guys know I'm a big football fan, in American terms, soccer. I mean, I love some soccer kicks. So, yeah, tough choice, but I'm going to go with Leon Edwards here.
All right. Next up is Nolan King. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah. This is an interesting angle of this, of the awards for me, is that I think my gut always tries to make things on a semi-even playing field when it comes to like the knockout, the submission, the fight. And so maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe it shouldn't be that way. Maybe I don't sometimes put into my brain like the magnitude of the situation or whatever. Like, I try to not only look at the mechanics, but look at the level of opposition, things like that. That's kind of what goes into my brain. So, with given these two are both, pretty big, high profile fights. Obviously, one was for a title and one was against the greatest pound for pound fighter in the world at that time. And the other one was maybe more of a veteran fight. I do lean with Michael Chandler, just because I feel like the optics of that kick, just the knockout itself, I felt was more special. And so maybe that's just me not necessarily taking in the whole situation, but I do feel like sometimes, and you'll see this with my submission of the year pick, where I think it becomes a little bit too much of a popularity contest. And I don't mean that in terms of anything insulting. Obviously, Leon Edwards' head kick was friggin' fantastic. And I'm sure maybe this isn't the right example to bring that popularity contest up on, but I do feel like a lot of times it's like whatever gets the most buzz, I don't know if this was the case, but like submission of the year, Khabib submitted Conor McGregor. And it's like, well, that was a big fight. And sure, it was magnitudinal and whatever, but I don't necessarily view that as the best submission, like a half defended neck crank. You know what I mean? So for me, I just look at these two knockouts for what they are, which are knockouts. And I have to go with Chandler. I think it checked all the boxes. It was devastating. It was against a guy that's sure, he's suffered his damage, but he's a tough guy, one of the greatest lightweights ever. And I just felt like that moment was pretty crazy, pretty violent, and just one for the highlight reel. One that I had to watch as much as I watched Kamaru versus Leon. I had to watch this Chandler Ferguson more.
Since the KO gets talked about a lot, guys, let's spend a little bit more time on this. But what about Pereira? Going back to him, his KO was from a multitude of punches. There's beauty in that too, right? It doesn't always have to be one strike. When you can come in with an uppercut, find your opening, throw a 1-2, maybe mix in a knee or something. Did you guys consider that one as well? And then what about even Molly McCann earlier in the year in women's MMA? You don't get as many KOs as you do in, with the men. And that was a thing of beauty. And you talk about that noise, that silence, like that vortex where all of a sudden everyone erupts. Man, London, England, the O2 Arena went bonkers on that one. So let's go around the horn again. Were there other ones to consider other than these two? We'll start with you guys.
Well, I mean, I think what it comes down to is it's kind of like music, right? Like some of these KOs are Metallica, right? They're hitting you right in the face. And then some of them are Beethoven, right? They're nice. There's a nice setup to it. Some of them you even factor in, like, was it more of a Hail Mary type of move, or was there any setup to it? I did like Meatball Molly's, and, some of the outside factors of just where it was, the crowd reaction, all that. And you also have to take in the level of opposition, right? Like as Danny said, Kamaru Usman, it's unstoppable, right? There has to be something towards that. So that was one that stood out for me, just because of with the people you're watching it with and watching them jump out of their seat when it happened.
How about you, Danny?
Yeah, there were so many good knockouts. Yeah, the Molly McCann knockout was beautiful, was devastating. I gotta also give a shout out to Jamal Hill knocking out Johnny Walker, because like that was probably that, as far as like reaction, that was probably the most bizarre one. Like he just kind of like flares his arms up and falls, straight back. It was crazy. But one knockout that I want to highlight that I feel like is not talked about enough, and I don't understand why, because this dude checks all the boxes. I mean, we talk about whether, it's about the aesthetics or it's, the significance, literally checks all the boxes. Chito Era putting the lights out on Dominic Cruz. I mean, the knockout was beautiful, was savage. I mean, the way he set him up and he threw that leg was crazy. And the photos that came after that were brutal. I mean, it completely destroyed Dominic Cruz's nose. On top of that, Chito's one hell of a fighter, super popular, one of the more loved fighters today, I would say. And then on top of that, it was a main event. He won performance of the night for that, obviously. And he gave Dominic Cruz, literally a historic talent at 135 pounds, his first loss outside a championship fight. So if you're looking at a great KO, I thought the Chito Era knockout was one of the best in 2022. And I'm not really sure why it's not talked about enough. Why do you guys think?
Well, Nolan, you go next. Maybe you can answer Danny.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, because I think if you look at that knockout for what it meant for not only just like, obviously it's got the violence factor, it was a bantamweight contender fight, but I think Vera's like the way that he targeted Cruz and used, he anticipated Cruz's weird movement, which has always been Dom's biggest weapon and biggest asset, is the fact that he moves so odd and is so unpredictable. And Vera was the first guy to kind of read him. I know Dom suffered the knockout or the TKO loss to Henry Cejudo, but that was way different. You know what I mean? That was kind of controversial. It was a series of punches, so that was way different. But so for Vera, yeah, I think that Danny's shining some light on this is totally proper. And
yeah, that was nice.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I, when you were talking, I thought you kind of got my head spinning, and I thought it was going to be a different Spanish-speaking fighter, which is Ilia Topuria, his knockout of Jai Herbert at UFC London. That was kind of buried in that violent card. Sure, it doesn't have the magnitude, but I think that that's one that should be talked about too, because that was seriously like one of those where I was like, man, like I hope Herbert's all right, because that's beyond the brain damage. You know what I mean? That's just super violent. So it was a good year for knockouts, though. There was a lot of ones that were buried on the prelims. Jeremiah Wells versus Court McGee was a good one. Shavkat versus Carlston Harris was a good one. Jason Witt, when he got knocked out by Josh Quinlan, was a good one. Our junkie photographer got a great shot of Quinlan pulling back his punch to not hit him with the Dan Hendo bomb. So there was a lot of good ones, man. I think a lot on the prelims, but when you start kind of factoring in those other factors we talked about and look at the strength of opponent, which I think is a very valid X factor in this whole thing, I think the ones that we kind of touched on are the ones that should be at the top of this discussion.
Yeah, and one thing I'm learning here as we're talking is a guy like Vera should get some credit and some votes for a KO like that, right? All they ever want to do is fight someone that's either ahead of them or they've done so much in their division that it kind of like puts them over, makes them take another step. And yet when knuckleheads like us get together and do these types of discussions, every once in a while you're gonna hear, but Dom was past his prime. It's like a double-edged sword for the poor fella that got it all done. You know what I mean? But let's go to the chat. West Coast is saying, I agree. Changer, KO best. He probably met Chandler. Jonk, he says, close one, but I got to go with Leon here because of how good Usman was. Chandler may have had the prettier knockout, but Tony was on a 5-fight skid streak. That's that stuff I was talking about. Jonk also adds, that was the most clutch moment I've ever seen in MMA. West Coast says, Leon got lucky. No, he did not get lucky. No, that was, he dug deep. He dug deep and he applied something that he probably saw when he was formulating the game plan. He got lucky in that sense that, it was late in the fight, man. And, obviously that he was that close to probably getting 50-45s across the board or something like that. But he did not get lucky. And one last one. This one's an early one for 2023. The 49ers knocked out the Raiders out of the playoffs. So I don't keep that one in mind when we do this at the end of the year. We got to move on here to the next topic, the submission of the year discussion. It usually goes in two directions. Bones were snapped, like the violent version, or someone got napped and then just gets left out there, sprawled out on the octagon floor or the cage or whatever. There does appear to be, beauty in both. It just depends, I guess, on your palate. You know the drill, guys. I need a name and why. And Danny, it's back to you.
Yeah, another difficult choice, but I think out of all the difficult choices that I had to make for the awards, this was maybe one of the ones that I didn't spend too much time in. For me, the most impactful, for me, the most significant submission of 2022 was Jiri Prochazka's rear naked choke submission win over Glover Teixeira. And yes, it's a rear naked choke. It's probably the most common submission that we see in MMA. It's not a very complex thing. It's one of the very first ones you learn when you go and take a jiu-jitsu class as a white belt. So I understand why people might not have that one. But again, the significance, they had just given us a crazy, almost 5-round war where both fighters were just completely spent, not only cardio wise, because it was a super high paced fight, but the amount of damage that both guys took was as if they were like in 3 title fights. Like, it was just ridiculous, where you even start getting a little bit concerned about their health. Like, should a towel be thrown here? Are these fighters going to be the same after this? Like, this is the type of fight that changes the life, not only career, but literally sometimes the health of fighters. So it was a crazy, crazy fight. And then on top of that, Jiri Prochazka has no history of submissions. He just gives us beautiful knockouts. That's what he does. He had never won by submission entering that fight, at least on a professional sense in mixed martial arts. And Glover Teixeira, one of the best grapplers that's ever set foot in the octagon, had never been submitted. So the fact that Jiri Prochazka ended up submitting Glover Teixeira after just a crazy, crazy war, that to me was just a very shocking moment. That to me was just the biggest, the most important submission, I feel like, or one of the in 2022. So for me, I give the award to Jiri Prochazka. Submits a guy that had never been submitted in MMA, and also gets his first submission win. Not a bad way to start submitting people, right? I understand the Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira was also a nice one. Won a title with that, just as Jiri did against Glover, and also submitted the guy with the most submission wins in UFC history. So that's a one that I considered. But no, I got to give it to Jiri.
Man, as you were talking, I was thinking, what's a damn shame of it all? You're right, man. Those two guys were spent. They left it all out there. And yet he had to vacate his title just like that. Something he earned, dude. He earned that night. And then just because he has this injury, that's a whole other topic. Because they're quick to do interims. I really think they could have. That guy earned it that night. Yeah. All right, Nolan, you, man.
Yeah. So as I alluded to earlier, in terms of I think so every month at MMA Junkie, just to peel back the curtain here a little bit, we do a submission of the month, knockout of the month, fight of the month, right? So there's some candidates, and I think like every month I'm always the one person that picks one that like nobody else does. Like, I think I have the kind of the hipster pick of the month, so this is my hipster pick of the year. But when you nail a submission in the UFC or Bellator that is so rare that they do not have a name of it, that when they go to Michael C. Williams for Bellator has to announce the submission, you tell them what the submission's called. And that's what happened with Luka Paklit versus Dante Shiro earlier this year. Just totally, if you watch the fight, and obviously now it's coming, so you can maybe look out for it a little bit more. But there's a transition on the ground, and they end up kind of in an awkwardly twisted, tangled position. And all of a sudden, Dante Shiro's out cold. Paklit releases the choke. Shiro goes flying backwards onto the canvas. And the Lukinator choke was born, man. I think it's one of I've never seen it in high-level MMA before. I'm not sure it's something that's going to be replicated, but it definitely was not an accident either. It was something that he set up. If you go back and watch it, super rare, super unusual. So for me, I think it qualifies. It kind of, as much as there are some submissions that have had big magnitude moments, like Danny said, Jiri versus Glover, you got You had Makhachev versus Charles. Like there were some good ones in big level, high level fights. But for me, I'm going with this one. These guys were good enough where this is a rarity. This is not some, two amateurs and some guy hit something that was random and, wasn't really a submission. This was somebody that had practiced some unusual technique and hit it against another high level guy and kind of had that impact of like a knockout out of nowhere. You're just like, what the heck just happened? So Luka Paklit, I don't know if anybody else in MMA is going to have you at this, as this pick, but you're my hipster pick of the year, man.
All right, Mr. Hipster, let me ask you this. His opponent, what was his name again?
Dante Shiro.
Dante Shiro. The technique is beautiful. You described it great, and he definitely deserves to be talked about. But is submitting Dante Shiro on the level of submitting Glover for a world title?
No, but again, there's a number of different factors. Level of competition is certainly one of them that I take into account here. But I do think you've got to look at some of the technique that goes into it. The rarity of that's a big one for me, actually, is like, which one of these things will I probably not see elsewhere at a high level? That's kind of one of the factors that I use in my brain. Like that's what kind of differentiated, I think, Chandler versus Ferguson for me against Leon versus Kamaru was I just think that the Chandler knockout was a bit more unusual, was a bit more rare, was a bit harder for a fighter to hit in a fight. So That's kind of where my brain goes when it goes to these things. And again, if this was in LFA prelims or something, I think there's a scale, right? I think there's a bit of a scale in my brain where it's like, okay, what can you do to kind of surmount that level of competition thing? And that's to do something that's really unusual. And when you do a submission that doesn't have a name, that was intentional, that's where you were able to make that big bound that is unusual to kind of to make.
Okay. All right. Moving on to Goes. Your sub of the year, Goes.
Well, I think this is going to be the first time tonight that the three of us are just in different places, because I am going to go Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira. It's just, if you're going to fight Charles Oliveira, the strategy that goes into that, you have to imagine most people are saying, don't let him get a hold of you. And for God's sake, don't initiate it, right? Don't put yourself in a situation where this guy can do this to you, let alone you try and do that to him. That's just a ballsy move. It really, really is. And Makhachev is just that good. It's a guy that was streaking. He was just getting rid of everybody left and right. He's got the most submissions. You don't see LeBron James get stuffed at the rim very often, right? So this was kind of like that moment for him to flip the script on Charles Oliveira and do that to him. I think it's pretty impressive. And like I said, I don't think a lot of people would even attempt to do that to him. So I thought that moment, the magnitude of it, the belt, all that was my pick.
Great stuff by the panel. Three excellent choices. We got a lot of discussing to do because, again, this one, along with the one before and the one coming up, Fight of the Year, we've yet to release it. So the discussions are ongoing. We're throwing elbows in the discussion channels trying to get our points across. Danny, go ahead, man. What you got?
Yeah, just before we move on, I think we have to talk about also Jessica Andrade's submission over Amanda Lemos. As Nolan mentioned, I do think that's a factor that's
standing arm triangle.
Yeah, that's worth considering. Like, have we seen this before? Is this history? Is this the first time that it's being made? Because MMA is a sport that evolves so quickly that at this point in 2022, well, now 2023, but you guys know what I'm saying. It's hard to come up with new stuff. It really is. I mean, the sport is pretty advanced, and to see something new for the first time, I mean, it's you got to consider that as well. And I think that applies to Jessica Andrade. I mean, the amount of strength that you need to have for those people that haven't grappled, the amount of strength that you need to have to submit somebody with an arm triangle is a lot. And then standing, so meaning you don't have gravity helping you because usually the other person's back is against the mat and you're on top of them. Man, that is just crazy. And at a high level as well. And let's not forget, Amanda Lemos, she's pretty jacked too. She's probably one of the stronger ladies at 115 as well. It's not like she submitted maybe, someone that has more of a longer, less muscular frame,
like Karolina Kowalkiewicz.
Sure. Yeah. Even like maybe like Rose Namajunas or someone that would be like maybe more susceptible to that type of submission. So we got to give her some credit for that.
Yeah, no doubt. That was a good one. And she snatched her early, right? Just seconds into round one, if I'm not mistaken. And look at the year Lemos has had since then. Great recovery for Amanda Lemos because she was devastated that night And since then, she's arguably become, maybe I don't know. You never know how they're going to treat the strawweight division, but maybe the next candidate to fight for the title. So good stuff there. Going back to the chat room, AR says, I think the significance and other outside factors should only really be considered if there was no submission or KO. That was incredible enough in its own right that happened. Okay. I mean, MMA, the MMA mosh pit says, George is such a casual. He went. George
Don't
is
listen to him,
casual.
George.
Shiro went with a split with Logan Storley. Okay. Yeah, man. I don't watch as much Bellator as I should. I really only watch the main card. So you got me there. No worries. And I'll keep looking back to the chat room, but we're going to go on to the next topic here. The next topic is just as difficult as the previous two. Heck, one of our choices might become a Hall of Fame fight one day. They got that wing, right? Again, explain your choice. What was it about the action that took place? What did you feel as you were watching said fight? Nolan, we're all ears. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the fight of the year for me is one we already touched on, Yuri versus Glover. I think that this had everything that MMA, makes MMA special, right? It had the skill, it had the technique, it had two guys that were able to, for the most part, for a light heavyweight title fight, display heart and good cardio and be able to go into those later rounds. I think they were very exhausted by the time the finish came, and that was obvious, but it certainly could have been a lot worse at 205 pounds. Now, the thing about this as well is that it had the madness, it had the chaos, it had the, kind of sometimes defense goes out the window and guys just going for it, making risks. Some of them paid off, some of them didn't. There was momentum swings, people getting hurt, people almost getting submitted, blood, everything that we love and makes this sport different, that fight had. So maybe there's some more technical battles. Maybe there's some more, skills that were on display in some other fights, or some bigger moments, or some fights that felt bigger. But for me, in a UFC title fight, between two very likable guys, between two very different skill sets, for them to go in there and have a war like that, I think was one for the ages. And it kind of checked off those intangible boxes of things that MMA provides to us that other sports don't. So for that reason, I have to go with Yuri versus Glover.
Yeah, I'm watching the chat.
And just one more thing too, the finish too. I mean, let's talk about that. That's the best Sunday has a good cherry on top, and that was it, man. I mean, just for him Yuri to be able to rally and pull off something like Danny described perfectly earlier, just the kind of flipped script nature of him submitting Glover to Shera. I mean,
right.
That's a crazy ending. It had everything.
I'm watching the chat. I don't usually like to go back on topics, but it was pointed out that, somewhere along the lines, it was kind of sloppy too. But I still think you got to take into consideration they're exhausted,
Yeah.
So for whether it was sloppy or towards the end of the fight, or maybe the technique wasn't the best, as maybe someone getting, snatched in the first round, like we described Andrade versus Lemos. Still, there still has to be something said for digging that deep. These guys were, if you remember in that fight, the scrambles that they had where they kept reversing, sweeping and just winding up in more favorable positions. So to be able to do that late, it is going to be sloppy. They're sweaty, they're bloody, they're exhausted. It may not look as pretty, but I still think there's skill in that, and not everyone can do that. That was an epic fight, Nolan. This one's really, really going to be hard to top. Next up is Goes.
I'm going to have to agree with him. I mean, I also agree with that comment about sloppiness. Like, I don't know if you guys remember, but Shogun and Hendo, and then Chandler and Alvarez were the same night. And I tend to go with Alvarez and Chandler being the better fight because of that. I felt like Hendo and Shogun got a little sloppy. The other one was a little bit more technical. But in this case, this fight, it just kind of made sense, man. It was weird because both guys went to their bread and butter at some point and it didn't work. Then they even tried, they had a plan B, they had a plan C. It was sloppy, but it was also a little tactical in between rounds. So then I think what makes a fight really, really good is the back and forth. And there was a lot of back and forth. And like George said, a lot of reversals. There were times where fighters looked like they were just on the way out and they got saved. So I think after a while, you have to kind of just put that sloppiness aside a little bit and just kind of enjoy what's going on. And just remember just being a fight fan, right? And cheering and going crazy and not knowing. And then to top it all off with that ending, That was pretty amazing. I think if these guys fought 10 times, I don't think you would see a fight like this ever again between the two of them. It was just the right time, right place. That's why I picked it.
All right, Danny, is it a sweep or you got something here that we need to discuss?
Boys, I'm gonna go Carla Esparza, Rose Namajunas. I'm just kidding. No, yeah, we talk about how there's no wrong answers, and for a lot of these topics, it's true, right? Like it's about taste, it's about how much I guess importance points you put on different baskets, this and that. But for Fight of the Year in 2022, there is wrong answers because there's only one right answer, and that is Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira. If you want to look at the significance and you want to weigh in all those factors, it was a title fight. I mean, a light heavyweight, one of the most prestigious divisions in the sport. But then if you want to just weigh in on the mechanics, bro, you had crazy, striking exchanges, crazy grappling exchanges. And then if you want to look at the drama, the momentum shift, usually when we see these type of fights, like Fight of the Year contenders, it's usually maybe like one guy wins one round, there's getting an early head start, then it's kind of even in the middle, and then somebody takes over, or maybe, they trade rounds. But in this one, they traded minutes. Like literally, there were rounds where I'm like, ooh, Jiri's getting his ass kicked. And literally like 30 seconds later, it's like, no, Glover is. Like there was so much drama just within rounds, not even the whole fight. Like there was so many momentum shifts. Is the craziest mixed martial arts roller coaster you'll ever be in. In my opinion, for a long time, John Jones Gustafsson had the best title fight, championship fight in UFC history. I think they rewrote history that night. You got to give it to Glover Teixeira and Jiri Prochazka. I mean, that fight was just phenomenal. And that is the right answer. They win that award, hands down. There is wrong answers here because that one's the correct one.
Yeah, what did you say, Danny? They traded minutes.
They literally went back and forth. It was crazy. Phenomenal fight. Loved it.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, again, what happened in that division where we were this close to getting that fight. And I guess 2 weeks out, Jiri Prochazka hurt his shoulder. Then Glover's just pulled from the card. Now Glover is fighting in Brazil for an opportunity to win the vacant title versus Jamal Hill. I'm sure pretty much all of you know that, but incredible the way this thing just has really, really turned over. All right, guys, great stuff there. Keep it locked on MMA Junkie, obviously, for all this awards. I do want to sneak in a couple additionals here while I have the panel. It's hard to get these cats together, man. I'm telling you, Danny was 17,500 feet. You said I mispronounced the volcano, isn't it? Nevada de Huila?
Huila. The H,
Huila.
You don't pronounce it in Spanish.
Nevada de Huila.
You just say, Huila.
Disculpa.
But no.
But that was pretty epic what you did there. And I think Goz and I have been as high as 16,000 in a car, though, as we were heading to also in the Andes to Colca Canyon in Peru. But never eclipsed 17,000. Folks, you can't even do 10 jumping jacks or you're completely out of breath.
The toughest thing I've ever done in my life.
I don't even think I can do 10 now, and I'm on sea level. But how about Rizin versus Bellator? Did it live up? Remember, I told you guys, I don't know if it was this panel, I said 5-0 Bellator, easy. Of course, I was being cocky, and I think I left out an opening for Rizin out of respect, maybe 4-1. But yeah, Bellator took them down 5-0. Is it what you expected? Did you enjoy it, Nolan?
Yeah, it was great. I think that it felt special, right? And I think that's hard to do in MMA where there's a million events every week and everyone's trying to be different and trying to do different events and trying whatever. I just think that the moment was special. I think that the fact they did head-to-head 5 versus 5 was great. I think it added a new wrinkle than just like, yeah, this is a Rizin card. We have a couple Bellator fighters on the main card that are going to go head-to-head. Like, no, you got a best-of-5 series. You got champ versus champ. A lot of things like that. Obviously, the pageantry, the walkouts were phenomenal, fantastic, doing things like that only Japan can do. I thought it was great. I loved it. I loved seeing, I think a lot of the Bellator fighters really enjoyed it. I know that's a very coveted thing now. You hear it all year. Oh, I'd love to fight in Japan. I'd love to do the Rizin crossover. So I think Bellator picked 5 guys that knew how to play the moment, how to do the walkouts. I thought, the gear was awesome. So I think it was pretty awesome, man. It was, I hope we see more of that.
Danny, we don't have much time. How about you? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I loved it. Everything about it was awesome. I would like to see if they do that, down the line more often. A little bit more competitive bouts. Maybe they don't have to be, the best guys, but like, just bouts that maybe are a bit more competitive to make it more intriguing. Like, because like going into this, as you mentioned, George, like, yeah, I was kind of expected that Bellator would go, 5-0 or maybe 4-1, but certainly Bellator had the upper hand. But yeah, I loved it. I love the show. I love the production elements that they put into it. I love the change in rule set. AJ McKee using head stomps and soccer kicks. I mean, he looked good doing that. So yeah, awesome event.
Look
Really
like
enjoyed it.
Kylian Mbappe out there. All right, how about you
Yeah.
guys? Finish up. What you think?
Well, I'm old school, man. If curling opened up with Pride music, you'd probably get me to sit there and watch it. It was incredible to hear the music, to see them walk out. It reminded me of just how important, once uniforms came into play, how much of the personality of fighters gets lost. And I think just seeing those guys show their personality that way, you remember them for the next time. And the fights, even though they were 5-0, they were pretty competitive. They were fun. So I think overall, that's a gem, man. If you're Bellator and Rizin, you got to keep doing that.
All right, I'm gonna give Cold Coffee a heart attack. Last one, 15 seconds each if you can do it. A favorite Stephan Bonnar memory. Nolan?
I love the Soshinsky fights. It was right when I was starting to really become a hardcore fan. And Stephan Bonnar's glare into the camera, all bloodied, and just that was American Psycho when I think of him.
Danny?
I mean, it's got to be a tough final. I became an MMA fan because of The Ultimate Fighter. So that was like my very first experience like watching MMA. So yeah, I know it's like cliche, but yeah, that moment I will never forget.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, goes.
Believe it or not, I feel like his call of the Showtime kick really elevated that.
Ooh,
The
yeah.
way he
Great.
exploded and just made it seem even bigger than it was. It was an amazing kick. His call really helped that too. So
Yeah.
that was my favorite memory.
Great stuff, guys. It's so unfortunate. Our deepest, most profound condolences to his wife Andrea, his son Griffin. The loss of Stephan Bonnar definitely felt by many. For me, it was him coming to the studio. He came, he lived in Vegas. He came many times. We always got a street fight story out of him. Him and his brothers, man, they really, really went at it. But he had a good one where he backed up a buddy at some bar in Chicago. It was around this time too, and I remember he, I guess, thumped the guy and then told him seasons beatings. And I swear to God, we pissed our pants. Had to go to commercial. Great stuff. Folks, you guys killed it yet again. Danny, Nolan, and Goes. Easily my best panel here. Don't tell the others I said that. Cold Coffee, awesome on the B-roll. He's going to be up for an Emmy one year. The chat room blew up. I loved it. Of course, I took it to another level. I was fantastic. Got to give myself a shout out. We're going to do this again, and we do it every week here, Mondays, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. So join us here on Spinning Back Clique. The rest of the time, keep it locked on MMA Junkie for the best coverage on MMA. Now go out there and be a champion.